We're continuing in the personal brand series, and today's episode is going to be a little bit different. I'm Christy Bilbrey. After working in a Senate press office, the White House, and corporate, I started my own business and realized none of those experiences taught me how to market myself. Thankfully, I discovered how brand storytelling and strategy could help me easily connect with others, promote my services, and grow my brand. I created the Business That Story Built podcast to help business leaders strengthen the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we tell others. Ready to take your mindset and messaging to the next level? Let's get started. Today's guest has a very unique background. She became the CEO of a large corporation in Manhattan after spending 20 years as an entrepreneur of a successful photography business in West Virginia. Beth Forester is the CEO of Animoto and is known for her strategic leadership and proven track record of driving profitable growth. With more than 2 decades of entrepreneurial success, Beth brings a unique blend of business acumen and a user-centric approach to corporate leadership. She crafts B2B strategies that strategize customer experience and drive business impact. Drawing on her background in visual storytelling, Beth believes in the power of video to connect on a personal level. She's passionate about empowering people to create videos that bring their unique personal or professional stories to life through video. Beth, thank you so much for joining today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, me too. So it was a lot of fun talking to you on our previous call and just hearing a lot of your story that I just felt like, oh my gosh, I want my audience to hear like all of it. So we'll see how much we can get into today's episode. But basically, you've always been entrepreneurial and you were sharing with me, even as a kid, the different types of businesses that you just went full steam ahead. Can you share a little bit about what that looks like so people can just see kind of more of your DNA, just the way that you're wired?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting because it seems like early on I started wanting to make money, drive results. I think the first thing I ever did is like a lot of children do. You have a lemonade stand or whatever. But I decided that the things that my mom was throwing out that I could actually sell and make money on. So I was like, oh, don't take that stuff there or throw it away. I can sell it. So I started having sort of yard sales or porch sales immediately. I was probably about 10 at the time. And the funny thing was, I'll give my parents credit. They just let me go. Just
That's
like,
a
I
that's
was out there by
awesome.
myself. I would put actually an ad in the paper and market the sale itself. So it was interesting. Probably the first real official business where I actually had a business license. I started when I was 16. So at 16, my dad had a empty lot that he owned, and I was down there one day and I saw all these cars parked there, and I went down several times. It was a common route for me to pass by, and every time I went down there, it was full of cars. And I came home one day and I was like, Dad, you've got all these people parking on this lot, and you know they're across the street, right down the street. They're having to pay for parking. You should actually charge these people for parking. He's like, I don't have
Smart.
time. I don't have time for that. You want to do it? You can do it. He's like, you got to pay the insurance. You got to do the maintenance. And he kind of said, well, this is what you'll need to do if you want to do it. And I was like, sure, I'll do it. So then I went out and basically sent letters to these people, put letters on their car. This was going to become a paid lot. Here are the improvements I was going to make. Here's a diagram of what the lot looks like. Select a space, and lo and behold, I sold it out in the first month,
That's
and
amazing that you thought through the
this
whole
was born.
process.
Yeah. Well, the funniest thing that I say is I think of myself now today, and if some 16-year-old had come to me with a letter saying they were suddenly going to start charging me for this spot that I'd been parking in for free for quite some time in this empty lot, I probably would have ripped it up and thrown it in the trash. Nobody did. It's a small town, so they knew who I was. But again, I give my parents a lot of credit for letting me run with my ideas and not getting in the way and supporting me in those decisions. I think I ran that parking lot through all the way through college, so it's a
Wow.
piece of income for me, actually.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and now before you went to Animoto, you had a photography studio. So what piqued your interest in photography to go down that route?
Yeah, like I think a lot of people or a lot of women that get into photography, I just started capturing my daughter as she grew up. So, you know, capturing everyday moments, taking pictures of her constantly. So that's really how my interest in photography became a huge hobby for me. So I was constantly taking photographs of her and really trying to, capture our memories for posterity.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that being such a natural progression. And then what made you decide to turn that into a business?
Um, there's kind of like several phases of really turning it into a business. I think the first thing is when I started photography, I was doing analog, so I was still shooting film. So it's quite expensive, actually. It was an expensive hobby,
Yeah.
and a lot of people were seeing my photographs, and they started asking me, friends and family, to take photos of their children. And so I started take doing that a little bit on the side, let's say, in order really to actually maintain my hobby and produce get the film and all the equipment that I wanted. It's quite an expensive
It
hobby to be honest with
is. My husband's into it, and I know it can be expensive.
So that's how it first started. But when I started going through a divorce that I really had to make some hard decisions, and really decide if I was going to turn it into a business that would support myself. So at that time, I was contemplating going back and teaching my. I had a teaching certificate. I'd gone to school, college for teaching. And I thought, well, I can do that, or I can go full heartedly into the photography business. So I had to really sit down and make a decision and think about, what would that look like? How much could I charge? What would my overhead be? I needed to make a certain amount of money. I needed to pay for a roof over our head, food, insurance. So I really had to sit down and really try to understand, like, was it possible for me to enter into this business and make a living? So I started. That's when really I had to get really serious
Yeah.
about the income and the cost of goods sold and my overhead to understand if I could actually afford to do it.
Well, that definitely leads perfectly into my next question, which is, are there any mindsets or structures that you think helped you set that up successfully? I mean, you've already kind of talked about really kind of focusing on what are my costs, what's my overhead. Um, was there anything else that you feel like helped you in those initial years really steer that successfully?
Yeah, I think one of the things that helped drive me to success is I really sat down and set goals. So a lot of times I would set the goal and I would work backwards from that. So like this is what I need uh, to maintain my lifestyle, to run a household, et cetera. So this is what I'd have to make. And then I start to work backwards from there. Okay. What are the costs of that? How many sessions would I need to conduct at an average price of X? What's the profit margin on that? So I really would sit down and say, this is my goal. How would I get there? And is it possible? Right. Um, so, that was one of the things I think throughout all of the pivots, you're going to hear a lot of pivots. For me, I think was stepping back, looking at the alternatives, weighing two options, understanding the risks, understanding what it would cost or what it would take to actually achieve what I needed to achieve. And I just did that time and time again in order to continue to grow the business.
Who do you think influenced you the most in the way that you responded to life's changes, whether those are planned or unplanned?
That's interesting. Again, I do give a lot of credit to my parents again and to my husband because there when a lot of these pivots I've made sort of like really sharp right turns, and they've always supported me and said, "Yeah, you can do it. I know you can do it." So I do want to give a shout out to them because without that, confidence and you can do whatever you put your mind to, um, I wouldn't I wouldn't be where I was. I think it's not a who, it's maybe a what. to
Okay.
be honest with you.
Yeah.
Um, honestly, I think about this, I reflect on this quite a bit, and I think that actually playing sports
Hmm.
was I really learned a lot of valuable lessons, and I learned to deal with the unknown. I learned to strategize, a lot of different things, and that came through sports. I recently read an article that talked about how a large percentage of women in company leadership roles had participated in sports. It was phenomenal. I don't want
Interesting.
to say the stat because I don't remember, but I remember going, wow, that's a lot.
Hmm.
And I'm one of those people. And it sort of made me start reflecting on, what sports had given me over time. Um, but it was interesting when it was specifically an article about women in leadership and the history of playing sports. So if you have young children or young girls, try to encourage them into sports. It will, hopefully it'll help them gain confidence that they'll need in leadership.
Yeah, that makes so much sense as I'm thinking about that because you have to adapt in the moment to situations and, dependent on the sport, if it's an individual sport or a group sport, you have to communicate quickly, work together, or get yourself wherever you need to be. And it's kind of like instant consequences and also instant successes. But the game keeps progressing. So you kind of have to not get stuck in a moment, but keep going. So that makes a lot of sense to me. That's really
Yeah,
interesting.
it really did help me in so many ways. I played both individual and team sports. And so, I constantly think about, how to get the best out of my team. That was something I learned in sports and how to sort of play to each person's strengths, how to adapt in a quick instance and real moments. And then just, the overall confidence that it gave me to know that I could, I could face challenges and adversity and come out on top.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, it's interesting in photography. I mean, it's not unique to photography, but since that's where you're coming from, I know a lot of people, they love what they do. They're amazing at what they do, but they really struggle to make it a successful business. So, kind of building on what you talked about a little earlier, how do you feel like you were able to continually do that? I mean, you had that business for 20 years. So, what did that look like that, maybe could help some people listening?
Yeah, you're spot on the money. I used to do a lot of training with other photographers about business and marketing, specifically in pricing and packaging and setting goals to make a profitable business. And so I think, when you're in a creative field and you get tied emotionally to the work, it's really hard to think about it as a business and to abstract yourself from something that you're selling that's not
Yeah.
part of your creative um, it- you know part of the creativity that you bring. So I think it is really hard in a creative field to be successful in business. um, what I would instruct others and what I think, again, I go back to the goal setting, is
Mhm.
every year I sat down and I made goals for my business. And I would lay out a plan for how I would achieve those goals. So that was really a key point for me. And a lot of times it wasn't just an annual goal. I had short term goals. My business was super seasonal with
Mm.
photography. And so every year it was easy to sort of lay out a plan because I would have to think about the whole year and I would know these sort of seasons and what I could expect from what I uh, produced in the previous year and the number of sessions that I did. So it was I was able to say like, okay, this year I want to sit down, I want to work on my price list. I shot, you know, 300 sessions last year at an average order value of X. I want to actually shoot 25 more. Or I shoot 50 less, but I want to achieve the same outcome. And how am I going to get to that? So just again, working backwards and saying like,
Yeah.
this is what I want to achieve. Some of those were personal goals, like what did I want to achieve as far as like becoming a more professional in my craft as
Mhm.
well. But it was really setting those goals and trying to achieve those outcomes. I think that being in business is like, especially a creative field, it's really hard because you will make mistakes.
Right.
And and I used to counsel people, and I've counseled my team. I'm like, we will make mistakes, period. You're going to make mistakes. It's what you learn from those mistakes that really separate someone that's successful from someone that's unsuccessful. So there are no failures, only
Mm.
learn, right? And so for me, it was a constant testing. I would constantly like, okay, I'm going to test this. I'm going to test this price point. I'm going to test this marketing strategy. Am I achieving what I thought it would achieve? If not, no. Why did it fail? What am I going to do next?
I like that because I feel like, goal setting is one thing, but then if you feel like, oh my gosh, this isn't working out the way that I planned, what do I do? And I like how your mindset wasn't going to, I must be a failure. This must not be for me. It was, how do I adapt? What do I change? It was, kind of pulling yourself out of that situation a little bit and being able to look at it very logically. And I think, that can be difficult for a lot of
Yeah.
people.
Disaggregating creativity and
Mhm.
logic really hard.
Yeah. Well, even, when it comes to navigating financial issues. So, if that's personally, professionally, if someone's in corporate and maybe they're responsible for a budget or it's a small business owner, it's so easy for fear to come in and take over and just paralyze you. So, how have you managed that? Like, how have you been able to pull yourself out and back that you could recommend to others?
Um, that's a really great question. I think um, for me, trying to disaggregate the emotion from what's logical next step has been really key to navigating these hard pivots. It's not easy. Fear takes hold, and a lot of times I've seen people act from fear or emotion to make decisions in these where it's required a hard pivot or something gets thrown at them that they're not expecting, and then that actually comes to irrational behavior and irrational decision making, right?
Right?
So I think the first thing to do is just really sit and think about it logically, like step back and say, I'm not going to think about this today. I'm going to
Mhm.
think about this tomorrow. But when I do, I'm going to use some sort of framework or I'm going to use some sort of system to decide what is right or wrong, to assess risk, opportunity, and even things like pros and cons, like, do I like this or do I
Right.
like this? What brings me joy? What brings me happiness? Maybe maybe my goal is I need to spend more time with my family. Maybe it is I want to jump this career ladder. So I think really like understanding that and breaking it down and using some sort of framework to detach the emotion will
Yeah.
make you more confident in your decisions and also make you more confident in the process of how you got to a decision.
Yeah. Well, and I like pro con lists is one kind of framework that you've mentioned. Are there any kind of go-to frameworks that have really helped you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, as far as myself, I probably, when I was in business just for myself, I didn't really have to answer to anyone. Right.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of me. And I was out there and in real time, I was making pros and cons. I was making my goals. How would I get there? And so what I was doing, it was a bit more passively. And once I started to realize the patterns of what I was doing, and then when came on to Animoto, which was, I had to communicate that with other people, I really started to adopt and read about different frameworks and the types of frameworks that you would use in various situations to prioritize your efforts, to prioritize your team's time or your opportunities and understand that. But I think when you're making personal decisions, the one that I lean on probably the most is it's like a proact approach.
Okay.
Uh, so you're really trying to focus on the problem that you're trying to solve,
Mhm.
uh, objectives that you hope to achieve. What are the alternatives? I talked a lot about, okay, well, I could do this or I could do this. Which one is the best option for me? What are the consequences of each? If I make this decision or this decision, what could happen? What are the risks? And then what are the trade offs? What am I giving up? Because it's all it's all a bunch of different choices and decisions that you're making. But I feel like that was the best framework to make
Hmm.
these bigger life decisions around that. So it's problem, objectives, alternatives, consequences, and trade offs.
Okay. What was the R?
Uh, well, oh, sorry, the risk.
Oh, risk. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's
yeah,
an easy one to let fear creep into. So that's good
yes.
to like move that to this is what I'm thinking objectively. And I know something that I love that you mentioned in our last call was timing with emotion. It's like, it's not that you just don't involve emotion. It's you're going to make this decision rationally and then you bring in the emotion to really kind of move you forward. And I thought that's so smart. That's so smart. I love that. Well, okay, so you've been at Animoto for a while. Tell us a little bit about Animoto. Why did you go there? Tell us a little bit about the company.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about Animoto is I was a user. I was actually an early adopter of Animoto. I used it in my photography business. It was a tool that I used as part of my sales process. So I was really successful with Animoto, and I really believed and loved the product. I had a history with them. So I was also, when I was speaking to other photographers, I was telling them how I was using Animoto, how they could use Animoto in their business for marketing or sales. And so I was a big believer in the product, and I had a relationship built with them. Um, Animoto is it's a cloud-based software for online video creation that makes it really easy for anybody, no matter what your skill level is, to create video. So you don't have to be a video professional, but you can produce professional quality videos. And so it's just a drag and drop tool that helps you combine your text, audio, music, um, images, and video clips together to create a professional video.
Yeah, they look really cool. I've been on the site and, I've heard about you guys for years and it does. It really I feel like it gives it a pop, especially, social media or there's so many applications that you can use it for. I just feel like yeah, it's a great product. So you had used that, you were familiar with them and so that's I know we're going to get into a little bit more about kind of how you work there. But one of the other kind of personal side big pivot that you made was the decision to kind of uproot your life from West Virginia that you'd always have to move to New York City. And that's such a huge lifestyle change. So what was the most difficult part of going through that?
Oh, I mean, I think fear.
Yeah.
But in a big change like that, I was leaving behind everything,
Right.
everybody, everything I'd ever known. I was born and raised in West Virginia. I'd lived in West Virginia for 98% of my life. The only time I'd really left West Virginia was when I went to college. So leaving upending your life. I mean, we sold everything. My husband and I both had commercial properties. We had a farm.
Mm.
Um, we had cars, we literally sold everything. So it was really scary.
Yeah.
Um, but again, I had sat down before and worked with those frameworks to decide this was the right decision, the right time for me in my career. And because there was a lot going on in the background as far as where I thought I could be able to succeed in the future,
Mhm.
uh, with the fact that photography is very physical. I was having to lower the amount of sessions that I was doing. West Virginia was going through a recession. I didn't think there was a lot of opportunity for us in business there. So, at my age, I hate to say this, but I felt like it was kind of a now or never jump.
Mhm.
If I was going to take the skill set I built as an entrepreneur and transition to a longer career, corporate career, I needed to do it then and not wait till I was in my 50s. Um, so it was scary. There were days that I was literally just felt like I wanted to throw up.
Yeah.
Uh, I was like, am I making the right decision? But I think again, going back and thinking about how I'd made the decision, why I made the decision, was super helpful. The other thing I would say is with regards to that is, actually when we left, I was making more as a photographer than I was going to make in my first year at Animoto as a marketer. So that's another big fear. So I really had to sit down and think about a budget and what it's going to cost me and understand what it costs to live in New York and what it because we know that it's more expensive to live in New York. So a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. I mean, if you're making a decision based on emotion, then it's really hard to grasp onto that to keep you going forward. But I love how you're talking about on those days when, yeah, you feel like I'm changing everything. I just want to throw up. How am I going to do this? You have something concrete to go back to help you stand on this, to remind yourself this is a sound decision. This wasn't an irrational freak out moment. And yeah, that does help. So can you share a little bit of the progression that you've had kind of going through the different positions that you've had there that led up to becoming CEO?
Yeah. So I've had a lot of different positions at Animoto, and I was really grateful for the organization that enabled me even to pivot somewhat within the organization and try out different fields. And it was always just based on a need, like what I felt like the business needed. And a lot of that was great because I had come from an entrepreneurial. I felt like I was able to sort of see some of the gaps and try to fill those gaps, and I was pretty adaptable. So whatever it was, I'd figure out how to do it. But I joined the team, a marketing team, as an expert in consumer and education segment because that was my background. It was essentially a product marketing job, but at the time, Animoto didn't know what product marketing was, really, to be honest with you. I was the voice of those segments. I did a lot of jobs to be done research to understand, why they were hiring us, how to communicate their needs, and why they would buy Animoto, and how to communicate that out to potential um, purchasers. So that's how I started. And then I pivoted at one point, knowing that I saw an opportunity for SEO. I went down deep into learn SEO. That's all I read about, all I studied. I did that and saw it as a real opportunity for the business as a channel that we weren't leveraging. And so that was where I got my first exposure to work on a product team, because basically we rebuilt the website to be able uh, to be more SEO friendly, let's just say, more Google
Okay.
friendly.
Yeah.
So that's the first time I sat on a product team. And so that was really a new experience for me. And then from there, I officially joined a growth team. They saw that I worked well with the product teams. And so I joined a growth team. And basically, it was a small product team, a couple of engineers, a designer, and myself. And we did a lot of growth testing. So we did tests with, on the pricing page, we did tests within the product to try to unlock more growth, more usage, and things like that. And it was probably one of the most fun
Hmm.
times that I had. Like, growth testing was so fun, and sort of making an experiment. What's your hypotheses? If we do X, we believe Y will happen. And analyzing all the results. So I do love data analysts, data analysis. Sorry, I do love that. I could sit and look at numbers all day to try to figure out the patterns.
Yeah.
So that was really fun. And I learned a lot and got more exposure to working on a product team. And so then at that point, I had been sort of championing we need product marketing within the organization. They had hired a couple of people to come in and try to stand up product marketing in our organization. It didn't take,
Mhm.
it didn't last very long because Animoto wasn't really quite ready for it. So I was asked at that time to stand it up. And at the time I was like, ugh, you just ran two people out. Like, we're like, that didn't work. I don't know that you want me to take on that role. And they're like, well, we want you to consider it. We think you can do it. You have success working on product teams. We think that you can stand it up in the work. So I sat down. I, again, made another list. I'd set in my spreadsheet, pros and cons, what I liked, what I didn't like. Uh, and I thought that was a bit more for me, right?
Okay.
It's more about me than the organization itself. I knew that Animoto needed product marketing and to be successful, but this was more about what would I be happy in that role? Would I be successful in that role? What did it mean for me in my career? What did I like to do? And
Right.
things. Um, so I I came back after a week and said, okay, I'll do it, but here are my demands. I really sat down and said, I think for it to be successful, these 5 things need to happen. So I was pretty bold at that time to say, like, this is what I think it needs to be successful.
Mhm.
Uh, Luckily, they listened, and they appreciated that I came with documentation to say, like, this is how I think it would work. Let's discuss this. And so I did that. Then I moved on to the VP of marketing. I took on the whole team after that. And then the next thing, our CEO stepped down, who was a founder of Animoto, and he asked me if I would take over. So that's like the end is kind of the brief part.
Well,
It's been kind of a wild ride.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I love when you talk about, you kind of brought these demands that you knew. It was so smart to not just say, this is a promotion, I'm just going to jump right in. But you took that time to say, is this going to be right for me? Because I think you're right. You know what you were saying before? It's if it's not right for you, then you're not going to lead it well. And to think, and you saw there's a disconnect from what's going to, um, how I'm going to feel successful in the role can only happen if these other pieces are there. And you didn't just shoot the role down and say, no, it's not currently, but you said, these are the missing pieces. And I think that's so smart, very methodical to say, okay, is this not just, yay, this could be really great progression for me, but how would it be? Would it, wouldn't, what needs to be there? And then the boldness to say, this is what I would need. There wasn't no sense of making a decision out of desperation or, oh, I just have to accept it and hope that in time I can change these things. Really communicating that up front. And, hopefully that made for a smoother transition into that role. But,
Yeah, it did. I think it's really important in any role. And that's, again, it goes right back to the setting your goals or objectives is
mhm,
really the best way to seek alignment is to say, this is the goal. This is what we want to achieve. And if
mhm,
everybody's agreed on the goal or objective, then that creates the alignment of how we get there. Someone told me something, and I think this is really great because I didn't put it in as like, these are my demands. But that sort of feels like it comes from a personal, which it was to a certain degree because I felt like that. But it was like, what would have to be true for this to be successful? And so in that statement, it comes across more like, okay, for this to actually work, for us
mhm.
to achieve this goal, what would have to be true? And so those 4 or 5 things that I put on there, I think I said, these are the things that I think would need to be true in the organization for us to actually be successful in standing this roll up at Animoto, this department.
Well, and that probably goes right into answering my next question is, at various times, whether it's as CEO or in the previous positions that you've had there, what has kind of been your true north and helped guide you in knowing what to do when others didn't?
Again, it feels like I'm saying a lot of the same things, but I think going back to leveraging the frameworks for
Mhm,
decision making,
mhm,
uh, I use frameworks every day for if it's prioritizing my own work and my time, the team efforts, what the opportunity is. It's something I try to instill on the team too, because as a team, if they understand, how decisions get made, how we expect decisions to get made, it gives them a lot more security in how those decisions came about. And it also makes them better decision makers because it makes them confident in their own decisions. And it leaves a lot of the gray area out of, I hate to say it, like whim or somebody's opinion,
mhm.
right? Like, okay, well, let's see what data we have. What do we know that can tell us, that can inform this decision making? And then usually I think about, I probably oftentimes go to the default because I didn't go out and get an MBA. I wasn't necessarily trained in business. I'd learned it sort of on the fly and in real time. So a lot of times I think about what do I need to know? What do I need to information do I need to get? How am I going to think about this? And I go in and say like, okay, what frameworks help me make X decision? And I'll research them and I'll look at different frameworks. And sometimes it'll crystallize for me a little bit more like, oh, okay, this is actually, and some I look at a lot of them and go, no, I don't think that's going to help me make the decision. That framework's not going to work. So really thinking about what I need to know, how I think I would get there first, and then maybe putting it into a form. I've created my own too. So sometimes I'll go out and do some research on a framework that I think would help. But sometimes I've sort of created my own framework to make sure that we are making smart decisions.
Well, and avoiding overwhelm because, we've talked about fear, but overwhelm is the other thing that can just shut someone down. And it sounds like having that, you're you're very quickly able to organize things that may feel very unwieldy or like you said, have a lot of gray area and it just kind of tightens that up a little bit, it seems like.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of people get lost. And I mean, even me as I was ascending, I'm like, can I make decisions fast enough to unblock others, right? And so I think too, once you start to, when it is a framework, then it's easy to fall back on and think about it really quickly of like, okay, what are the three things I need to know to make a decision quickly, right? And so it makes it easier in the future to start to parse that out in your head in real time than actually having to step back and put it
Mhm.
to paper. I think that's one other thing I didn't really say in all of these things when you're making your goals, when you're doing a framework, write it down,
Mm,
get it on paper, or even if it's digitally. Like to me, that's when objectives or goals become real. That's when you start to hold yourself accountable for
mhm.
those, making those decisions and what happens next.
What's been the biggest surprise to you as CEO?
Well, I'm pretty new to this role, so it's been a little over 6 months. I think the first thing I was surprised, which actually happened within days, is how isolated I felt.
Mm,
I felt like this single person making decisions, having information that no one else had. And it just felt very isolating. I think it was also hard for me to go from sort of peer. So I was a peer to a lot of people. I'd worked at Animoto for almost 9 years at that point. And to go from peer to CEO, it was just a different mind shift. And so that felt isolating in some way as well. Um, having that weight of the entire team, I think that was another thing that that I don't know that I was really surprised about that, but it was definitely something that I felt almost immediately a lot larger weight on my shoulders.
interesting. Yeah, that doesn't take long. It's like it's weird because even trying to step outside and logically think about it, there are some pieces that are so purely emotional that just switch. So, yeah. Yeah. What are you most excited about with Animoto's future?
Um, I'm really excited. I'm actually in the progress. We're working on our new vision and strategy. Looking out over the horizon for the next 3 years and really going back to I think where Animoto first began is really solving problems for people in within video creation. Um, it felt like through my years at Animoto, we kind of deviated away from that a bit and sort of created a tool we thought people should or would want instead of really listening to the users and actually creating what they need and listening to their blockers and what was actually prohibiting them from creating video. Because let's face it, that's another thing. Video's scary to a lot of people.
Sure.
And it's also it's not easy, but there are certain things that we can do to make it easier to help make decisions, creative decisions, to make sure things that look the way they intend them to look, and use our own expertise as video creators, as knowing the audience to actually really solve some of the challenges for video creation, and real these sort of pain points as part of that for businesses, small businesses, and teams.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I it is and it's obviously an area that's really growing. It's growing in importance. I feel like every platform is really pushing it. So, yes, the more tools. So, that's cool. It'll be fun to see how that grows. So, is there any final piece of advice? I know we've covered a lot that you would like to leave with listeners today about how to identify and kind of navigate pivots successfully.
This is one thing when I took over the role, it was pretty scary at the time because we had to lay off people. They laid off people when I assumed the role of CEO. We had, that's always a very difficult time for everyone in those circumstances. So I talked a little bit about a lot of my pivots during that time and the pivots that brought me to Animoto and how I had to make really hard choices when I didn't see a bright future and I had to actually chart a new path. So I talked to the team a lot about courage over comfort. We tend to always want to fall back on comfort, the known, that's our default. Like what's easy, what's known. Some people say the devil but
Right.
versus the one you don't. So I challenged myself at times and I challenge others to take courage over comfort. But then again, really like making those hard decisions, leveraging framework, put your goals down on paper, weighing the risk, weighing the opportunities, really trying to understand what the trade-offs are and make your decision. You're using those frameworks to help you navigate that decision making and to actually remove some of that emotion out of that process.
I like that. And I like the courage over comfort. That is very important to remember.
I've had to remind myself of that quite a lot, to be honest with you.
Well, thank you so much, Beth. This is so incredibly helpful. This whole series has been about different areas of personal branding, what people need to know, but I feel like it only becomes possible when you have the right mindset to really move in that direction. So, thank you. And what is the best way for listeners to connect with you?
Well, I first want to say thank you for having me. This has been a great discussion. I'm excited to be chatting with you, and it was great hearing about your story as well when we chatted the first time. The best way to connect with me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can look me up as Beth Forester, or if you want to reach out to me via email, you can email me at beth.forester@animoto.com, and I can spell it out if you want.
Sure. And then we'll have it in the show notes as well. But sure, for
Okay,
people who are
great.
just listening. Yeah.
eth.forester@animoto, ANIMOTO.com.
Great. Thank you again so much, Beth. And for everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, this is the business that Story built. How are you growing your brand? Are you targeting the right people, developing the right relationships, and consistently getting the visibility and credibility that you need to grow your business? Whether you need a plan that's small or large in scale, our PR firm and consulting services can design and implement what your business needs to grow. To schedule a free call and learn how we can partner with you, email Christie@ChristieBilbrey.com. That's CHRISTIE@CHRISTIEBILBREY.com.